So welcome everybody. I am Dr. Keith McCall. I'm the Assistant Director of the Office of Graduate Fellowships and Awards here at FSU. We are part of the graduate school. One of the requests that we get most often is to facilitate things where current graduate students can hear from their peers, their colleagues, their fellow graduate students who have been successful in applying for and securing external fellowships and grants. So I'm very pleased to have with us today 3 students who have done just that. Abby Rayhard, Alex Moran. So should have asked you beforehand. Alex Moran and Daniel Gutierrez, who have each been successful in their pursuit of funding. I have questions I will ask them, but the hope is that all of you who came today have your own questions, and this is your chance to ask, again, your fellow grad students who have been successful in their pursuit of funding, the things you'd like to know. The questions I'm going to ask are somewhat broad and generic, and they may not answer the particular questions that you have. So I think this type of panel works best if you all do have your questions. So feel free at any point to raise your hands, to drop your questions in the chat, and we will facilitate having your questions answered by our panelists. But I'll start today by asking each of our panelists to please introduce themselves and to tell us about the awards that you've applied for and won, but also if you've applied for awards and not won those, let's go ahead and talk about those as well, so that we're upfront about the idea that you don't always get the things that you go after. Alex, since you joined me first in the waiting room, or in the pre-show, basically, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so my name is Alex Moran. I'll explain. Do you want who I am very briefly?
Yeah. So introduce the program you're in, maybe the area of research you're engaged in, and then what your funding is.
Yeah. So like I said, my name's Alex Moran. I'm a 5th-year PhD candidate in the education policy program. I study teacher policy. My dissertation is teacher supply and how loan forgiveness increases or impacts teacher supply, which is what my grant is attached to. But I also have part of my dissertation is on teacher retention and racially congruent colleagues within a teacher's school, and how it reduces turnover for teachers. So that's it. Oh, the grant. Yes, thank you. So my grant is the American Educational Research Association joint with the National Science Foundation. It's their dissertation grant. So that's the one I won. It's for 1 year, 1 year of funding for my 5th year. Ones that I applied to that I did not get. I applied to something called a Russell Sage Foundation grant that I did not get in my 4th year. That was probably the only other bigger one. I've applied to a lot of fellowships and summer things that I didn't get any of those. This is the biggest one that I thankfully got, but I did not. This is the only one that I've got. I've applied to probably 6 or 7 other ones, and I didn't get those, but I got the big one, so yeah.
Abby, we'll move to you.
Hi, I'm Abby Rehard. I am a 4th-year PhD candidate in ethnomusicology in the College of Music, and I literally just booked my defense date today for February, so I'm very excited. Let's see, in terms of the fellowships I've applied for, while here at FSU, I applied and received the Presser Graduate Music Award, the Fulbright Research Award in Brazil, the Judith Tick Fellowship, received and applied and received. I also applied for the fellowship for the the Association for American University of Women fellowship that I did not get, and then the PEO Scholar Award, which I recently received funding for this year. But that's to say, just this time at FSU. Prior to this, I had applied to the Fulbright program 3 other times. So, this time was the good charm. So very thankful for the Office of graduate fellowships and awards.
Daniel, wrap it up for us.
Well, hi everyone. I'm Daniel Gutierrez. I am in the biology department. I'm a second-year PhD student. And the reason I'm here is because I was awarded an NSF Graduate Research Fellowship and a McKnight Doctoral Fellowship for my graduate studies. I've also applied to a couple more things, mostly some smaller grants to fund my research, and I applied to 2 of those, one from Sigma Xi and one from the Society for the Study of Evolution earlier this year. I didn't get any of those. And then this semester, I've applied to 4 or 5 different grants, submitted one today. Haven't heard back from those yet, but it's a constant process, as my fellow peers here have showed as well, even from the early stages to get funding for yourself and to fund your own research as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you also. Does anybody want to ask a question of our panelists, or should I go to my next question? Okay, well, as it's clear, you've all applied for multiple things. Some have been successful, some have not been successful. Every application across, the various things you all have applied for has been, a fairly different application process. I'm familiar with some of them, not all of them, but, every application process is unique. But they all share everything you've applied for. You all had to explain your research as, part of what you were doing. How have you gone about thinking through how to explain your research in very clear ways to the different review audiences that you've spoken to? Whoever wants to start that, whoever feels like they've got an answer in mind can start with it. Another way of asking it maybe is how has applying for awards helped you clarify what your research is, in fact?
I can take it. So I think the most beneficial way or thing that I've gotten out of applying for these things, whether I want or not, is usually the proposals are pretty short. Like even like a full research paper. I mean, I'm thinking specifically in like a method section. It's 6 or 7 plus pages just for the method section alone, whereas a proposal is maybe 4 total for like everything. So really talking concisely but clearly about kind of the methods I'm using and like creating that background section in a very short but meaningful way. I think that was a really kind of beneficial for me, where I'm so used to writing not long-winded, as I tend to talk a little bit long-winded, but just being a little more concise in what I'm trying to explain.
I agree with Alex as well. I think since each one of you is likely the expert in the subjects that you're writing a grant for, it's easy to get caught into all of the little details that don't really have a place or a space, for that matter, in writing a proposal for a grant or a fellowship. Like in many cases, they're even smaller. The GRFP, for example, is only 2 pages for all of it, including references. So there's not really much space to go into all the technical details that go into a research paper, or into as many definitions and as much detail, even with the introduction, as it goes in, as a research paper would have. So I think it's always a good exercise. At least for me, I usually start with more pages or more words or more characters than the limit allows. And then I start cutting back, and it's kind of a process of realizing what out of all of this is really fundamental and what I can cut. And at the beginning, it feels like I can't cut anything. Everything is important, but slowly you start realizing that there's ways to make it shorter, or just deleting it, and it'll not change the meaning of the main point of the proposal. And I think part of learning that is also knowing who the target audience for that proposal is. Much like when we're writing a paper, or like papers aren't written the same way if they're being sent to a super specialized journal, or if they're being sent to a more general journal. Same deal with the proposals, knowing what's the target audience at the funding agency, and then tailoring the small amount of detail that one can have and writing for that audience so that they can get the point is really important.
Definitely agree with both Alex and Daniel, and I love, the distillation process of your ideas. I'm just trying to make it as clear and concise as possible. It was like a very fun puzzle for me, just like, what is the most important part about my research? And for me, I think the writing process really helped me clarify like the significance and the importance of research in music in my field. That sometimes I feel like, oh, there are like, more grander projects out there, but really being able to write about that and see that no, this research does have a big impact, and I can connect this to a lot of different even disciplinary areas. And then I think it's always a great exercise in avoiding jargon and trying to speak to a very broad audience about your work. And that's the most useful skill, I think, when you're, sharing research, when you're applying for funding.
Yeah, I think you all hit on also, what is the most important thing, but also often the most challenging thing, which is how to make it very concise, very direct, how to tailor it to the audience that you're speaking to. And, fellowship and grant writing is a unique genre, and it's not always one we get much training for doing in our actual disciplines. I mean, I went through a master's program and a PhD program, and we never once were taught how to write a grant. I suspect that's the same for many of you here today. So I'm wondering, and there's a great question in the chat that we'll come to next, but since this is kind of a follow-up, I want to stick with this idea for a moment and ask, basically, how did you all either learn to do this, or what resources did you find useful to help you? And those resources might also be, your advisors, your colleagues, your peers, people who maybe provided feedback. I mean, how did you go about actually writing successful applications?
I think feedback is the main part of it, and I don't think this is something that ever goes away. I'm in my earlier stages, I think, compared to Alex and Abby. So I'm still fairly new to that process, but I think the main source or resource to be able to write a successful grant is having other people read it. And like, obviously having people that have been successful at it is good because they can provide feedback from that point of view, but I don't think that's necessarily a requirement. Like even having people that have gone through the process and didn't get it, they might have maybe even better insight than people that have gotten awards, because they might have gotten feedback, or they can look back and see what didn't go as well with that specific proposal after the years, which is something that, and you can still be critical about things that you got, but it's easier to be critical about things that you didn't get. And you can clearly there was something that needed to be improved. But having many people read the proposal several times, which comes with writing it with ample time to be able to have feedback, incorporate feedback, and let's say, like, be excited about getting feedback, because I feel like in some cases, and I think that's normal, like people can get discouraged by having feedback and someone telling them that something needs improvement. And I think that's the best thing that someone can give to you in a learning process, because it means that these people are thinking about how you can improve yourself and how you can make this better, and are aiming at you being able to do a better job, or for the case of grant writing, having a much stronger proposal or application. So getting as much feedback as you can from your peers in the same level, from your advisors, from your mentors, from your parents. Even my parents read my own proposals, and neither of them are biologists. All of them provided useful feedback in different degrees that I then reflected on, incorporated as I thought. I was open to as much feedback as I could, and then some things I might have not agreed on, and I decided to discard them. But most things were clearly things that I could improve, and spending time working through feedback is I think one of the keys to being successful.
Piggyback off of Daniel and say, just emphasizing getting feedback from as many different people and as many people outside of your field as well. A lot of the committees who are reading your grant application, your fellowship, might not even be associated with your field. That was the case for a lot of mine. So I also utilized my parents pretty heavily. Someone who has no idea like what technical terminology is used in music are, as much as possible, getting friends, getting professors outside of music to read my work, provide comments on what could be clarified. All really important. I think those were my biggest takes, and I think Daniel said it all too, of just being as open as possible to feedback and having an early start. I remember my Fulbright application, I think I had like made a draft of it like the spring semester before applications were due in August, and it was, I can't even count how many times it was I had revisions upon revisions in my folder. So ample time, help yourself out.
Yeah, I think like feedback is definitely one of the like most important things. Related to that is not reinventing the wheel. I might be in a fortunate situation. So my advisor actually won the award that I won maybe 4 or so years ago. So I recognize that like not everyone's going to be in that situation, but finding resources to kind of use as a framework. Obviously, your research is unique to yourself, so you can't just like copy and paste, and that's wrong for other reasons. But like just seeking out resources ahead of time so that you kind of know what maybe a successful template looks like. I had my advisor, someone else in my department a couple years ago, won the same award. So I just reached out to them. I'm going to guess there's probably some type of doctoral group like in your subfield. Like I'm a part of like a community group across the country of education policy doctoral students. And we have like a dedicated panel session every year for grant writing and tips and tricks to win it, and it's open to everyone. It is education policy focused, so just putting that out there. But it's a very useful thing, but seeking out those resources ahead of time so that you can see what a successful thing looks like, and you have a template. You're not just starting from scratch when that's just not really the way it works. Like you should be looking at other people's things, and you should be kind of identifying other frameworks that are successful,
which also relies on giving yourself plenty of time before the deadline to do that, to research the award you're applying for, make sure you understand what they're looking for, who that review audience is. Even for many of the very common awards, you're going to be able to find other people's example essays. As a fellowship advisor, I would always encourage you to write your own draft first and then to go look at the examples so that you're being as authentic to your own voice as you can, particularly when you have to write personal statements. So not everything has a personal statement, but Daniel and Abby, I know you both. Daniel, I know you had one for JRFP, and Abby, I know you had one for Fulbright. And for both of those awards, those matter a lot in the review process. And you absolutely cannot, you can't base your personal statement on anybody else's personal statement. But even if you can't find example essays, one thing you can always do is very carefully break down what they're looking for when they tell you, when they list the prompt and they tell you the review criteria. And you can basically reverse engineer from those two things exactly what you should be putting into your proposal. Funders are not trying to trick you with what should go into an application, and they're not looking for you to, as Alex said, reinvent the wheel. So if they give you a prompt that says include item A, B, and C, write it as A, B, C. Don't start with C because they're looking for it in the order that they asked you in the prompt. Again, knowing that relies on giving yourself plenty of time to know what it is you're applying for, to do your research, and then to give yourself a lot of time then to adequately draft it. Another thing I just want to emphasize too is Daniel made the point that seeking feedback can be, maybe a little intimidating because we don't always want feedback on our ideas, and applying for grants and fellowships can already feel a little bit intimidating. So I know sometimes there's a tendency among graduate students to not tell anybody that they are applying for a fellowship or award because they don't want people to know that they didn't get it. So if you don't tell anybody, if you don't ask for feedback on it, then, nobody else knows that you failed in getting this thing you were seeking. But you also severely hurt your chances of getting it by not actually engaging anybody else in the process to make you have a stronger application. That's absolutely something that my office will do. There's a writing center at FSU. Your faculty advisors will be very motivated to help you apply for the things that you should be applying for in your field. And your peers are a great resource. So seek the support because your chances of getting it will go up a lot if you get even just a couple other people to provide feedback. So Sam asked in the chat a question that I think fits well with that idea that it can be a little intimidating to do this, which is, so first, you all may have read it, but Sam, thanks you for sharing your research and your forthcomingness with the funding you've received and not have received. And particularly, I think to that point of not having received things, how have you dealt with, or could you describe your experiences with imposter syndrome when applying for funding? How has that hindered you? How has it perhaps motivated you? How has, I think we've probably all faced imposter syndrome as people who are either have gone through graduate school or are currently in graduate school. It comes in different shapes and sizes, and at times we're not always expecting. But it certainly can make things like seeking funding, throwing your hat into the ring a bit harder than it would be otherwise. So what role has that played for each of you?
So something I've really relied on in not only applying for grants, but also, submitting papers and going through the peer review process and everything. So I was on a hiring committee for my department, and the amount of really, really good candidates that applied that we didn't even give a first round interview to. I know this isn't a job market panel, but we didn't even give a first round interview to, but now they're wonderful scholars and they're doing amazing work somewhere else, but it wasn't what we were looking for that specific job. So kind of holding on to that here, where it is still people reading your work and reading your proposals. And a lot of the times, even if they try, a lot of times people have, whether it be an explicit agenda or something just in their own head. People sometimes just that it just doesn't resonate with them. It doesn't mean it's bad, but it just means that might not be what they're looking for. And I really held on to that, it is still people reading your articles or reading your proposals and reading your articles if you get to that submission stage. So holding on to that it's not bad, it's just it wasn't aligned. It's not that it's not bad, it just didn't align to what they wanted in that moment, where the following year it might be exactly what they're wanting. That's what happened to my advisor. My advisor didn't get the grant the first time, but she applied the next time and she got it. It's just this alignment in the moment where even it might align when the next moment comes up. So I frame it as alignment as opposed to quality.
That's a great point. I was talking to a student about this recently because the critical language scholarship is due next week, and I read for it not last year but the year before. And the things that separated the person I gave a 5 to versus the person I gave a 4.5 to were sometimes so slim. I mean, the really good people stand out a little bit more than the people who were really, really good. And then below that are people that you can't even quite explain to yourself why maybe this person appealed slightly more. But I mean, the competition at the top is tough. And I mean, most fellowships and grants have somewhere around, kind of average, I would say, is a 15% acceptance rate. So 85% of people who applied for that thing are not getting it. And chances are, just on average, you're going to fall into the 85%. And that most of the time does not mean that, you had a bad proposal. It just means somebody else was slightly better or appealed to a single reviewer slightly more for some, unquantifiable reason.
I'd like to add on that as well that like imposter syndrome is something that everyone has experienced and everyone will experience at some point. It is not limited to academia. There's always going to be a point in which you think you're not good enough, or you think what you're doing is not very interesting, and that's normal. There's nothing shocking about that, and there's nothing bad about that. And then it's a matter of not just for this, but I think in general for any objective that one decides to do in life, it's a matter of being resilient. So like the best way of not getting the funding is not applying. Like that's 100% guaranteed. You don't apply, you don't get the funding. You apply, send something, you have a chance of getting it. And I think the deciders for being successful or not, it will not necessarily come to one single application because nobody wins every single thing. But of being resilient and like powering through those moments in which like maybe you're not really feeling it. And then I feel like this might sound philosophical, but I think it comes that like there's some peace of mind that comes with just accepting the reality that there's always going to be someone better than you, which doesn't mean that you're bad, and it doesn't mean that you cannot be that person that it's better than someone else in the future. But like there's always brilliant people. Like none of us are particularly special for that matter. We're all doing research in specific fields that we will be experts on. But that doesn't make us better scientists or better people or better academics. It just makes us specialized in one specific subject. And there's always going to be someone that will have one more grant than you, or one more publication, or a higher acceptance rate, or something for that matter. And that's okay. So like accepting that, or like going through life without a sense of I am the best and I should be the best overall, and instead replacing it with I'm going to try to be the best version that I can be of myself, I think eases that feeling. Because like, for example, say you applied for a grant and you did it, like this happened to me earlier this year. So if you indulge me with a second to tell this story, I sent a couple of grant proposals for one of my chapters. I need an ample funding to do some molecular work for one of my dissertation chapters. And I wrote the proposals, and I didn't think it was my best work. I knew I had written better things, but I sent the first one, and then I reworked that one for the second one. And the second one, I felt better about it. And then I got the results for both almost like on back-to-back days, or like within a week, and it was a rejection for both. And sure, I was disappointed. It's not like being disappointed about being rejected is bad. Like I think that's the normal feeling. But I look back at it, I was like, well, you know what? I remember thinking to myself, like, this is not my best work. If I had gotten it, that's great. But I think I can do this one better. And even if it was my best work, well, you know what? One of the reviewers wasn't particularly excited about my proposal. It's like, well, the other one gave me full like perfect scores, and then another one gave me average scores for the exact same proposal. So I was like, well, you know what? It can be a luck of the draw, and someone was better than me this time. I was better than someone else for a couple of fellowships that I got. So it'll come back to me, and I'll have more rejections and I'll have more acceptances. And so it is just the way that it goes. There's very few people that get every single thing that they apply to, and the majority of us, we're not going to have that case, and that's fine. Just got to be resilient about it and continue applying, continue working, and not letting those like feelings of inadequacy slow you down from your main goal.
Thanks for the pep talk, Daniel. That was like really helpful to me, hopefully to others too. Yeah, I, like everyone else, deal with imposter syndrome, and at least with some of the fellowships that I've written, like the Fulbright with the personal statement, I found that the most challenging part, because I've always been someone who has doubted myself and been super down on myself. So it was hard to like write a single page about why I should be picked and like why this is important and how, I'm the perfect person for this research. So that was a struggle. And I think this time around, when I applied for the Fulbright, I was really honest and like acknowledged the mental health struggles that I've dealt with and wrote about that in my personal statement and how that drove me to my research project. And I think that like really aligned with what the Fulbright committee was looking at. But I think just being honest about those feelings too, and showing your resilience to that and your the importance of your project and your livelihood. Like you are a person too. You're not a vacuum or a robot. A lot of things affect your life and they're going to affect your research. So I think acknowledging that is helpful too.
There was a, perhaps you all have seen this, there was, when I was in grad school, there was a movement that popped up on academic Twitter and elsewhere to share your like CV of failures. And it started with this Princeton professor who shared his CV of failures, which was basically a list year by year of all the things he tried to submit that were rejected, all the fellowships he didn't get, the jobs he applied for and had campus visits for but didn't get the job. Alex, he also in 2015 applied for the Russell Sage Research Grant, didn't get it. He applied for a National Science Foundation research grant in 2013, didn't get it. So we just basically started a conversation around what if we were upfront about showing our students who look at me as a Princeton professor and think, oh, he's gotten everything he's applied for. He was the top of his class. I mean, the assumption of that, and then think, I don't know how I'll ever stack up. And he's trying to change that narrative and say, for every like one thing that I got, there's a list of a bunch I didn't get. And so what if we were more upfront about sharing those in academia and helped our students understand that, exactly as Daniel was saying, that you just kind of have to accept that, failure, rejection, at least, it's not necessarily failure. Let's call it rejection. Rejection is built into the process that, it really can just be luck of the draw sometimes of like, yeah, one you got read by two people, one thought you were great, the other didn't, and that's it. The scores got averaged and you didn't get it. Try again next year. And I can say I've definitely worked with students who didn't try it again next year and got it, or who tried 3 months later for a very different thing, but applying with basically the same proposal and got that next thing they applied for. Any follow-up questions on that point, or follow-up comments, anybody, or I mean, people in the audience as well, if you have. Okay, yeah, well, Sam, I'm glad you found that a useful discussion. A couple questions in the chat at this point are revolving around the idea of basically how did you all find the things that you applied for? So again, both in terms of the ones that you've applied for and been successful with, but also the other things that you've pursued. I mean, Daniel, you mentioned a few research grants that you've applied for that would be specifically aimed at helping you cover some research costs associated with your dissertation. So how have you all found those things? Has it mostly been sort of word of mouth and just knowing of these larger awards because they're ones that people apply for, or advice of your faculty, or have you used funding databases or other listservs and things like that?
So I think, as students, well, I don't think we should be expected to like be aware of everything immediately. I think it does fall on kind of, your advisor in the department to make you at least somewhat aware of what's going out there. So you might have to prompt them, say like, hey, like I'm looking for grants. I'm looking for funding. What are you aware of? You might have to be a little bit active about it, but when you're coming into it, like neither of my parents have done a PhD. They don't even know what this process looks like, let alone like how to apply for grants. So I think, using your advisor, using your department is a really good first step. I also really heavily relied on social media. when I was applying for that, Twitter was still a thing. I don't know, at least in like my space in education, Twitter is not very well liked right now. And so I don't know what that is going to look like the next kind of round for applications, but I rely really heavily on social media to, you know, they're announcing it there, right? Like they want people to apply to these grants. They don't want two people applying when they have $100,000 to give out. So, you know, they're going to market it, they're going to advertise it, and, you know, just kind of trying to just be in certain spaces and you'll find it. The other thing is looking at CVs, go through your department, look at the professor in there and look at what they've won. You know, you're not going to get a $3 million IES grant. IES is Institution of Education Sciences. They give, it's like part of the Department of Education, federal. They give millions of dollars grant. You know, you're not going to get that as a third-year PhD student, but you know, some of the smaller ones, you know, your people in your department probably got dissertation grants. Not all of them, but there'll be a couple, and you'll be able to identify what are in your field and in your space to potentially apply to.
I was gonna mention that exact thing that Alex just said. I went to, well, aside from talking to peers and talking with my advisor, several of the things that I've gotten or applied to were because my advisor recommended them. But I also went and looked at CVs of people that I knew that were in my same field, both like in various stages, like postdocs, faculty, young faculty, older faculty. And then specifically looked at the years that matched their PhD program and the awards that they got, because as Alex said, like as a PhD student, I will not be aspiring for a $400 NSF grant in my case from the National Science Foundation, but I can apply to the smaller grants from the different societies that could be relevant to my field of study. And several of the ones that I've applied to this semester were because of that, a combination of targeting the most relevant society that applies to my field of research. But then I also found a lot by going through professors' CVs and finding what they did to fund the research. And even more so, if you have the possibility, finding people that have done logistically similar research to what you want to do. So in my case, first, like doing my research in Panama. So I do international research. I need funding for that. I do my research in animal behavior. I do my research in birds. Like all of that. Like, but I was able to find several people that matched all three categories, and those were the ones that I applied to first. And then I went and looked at which ones matched two of those three or one of those three, and some of them were I was eligible for. Some of them I was not. Some of them still exist. Some of them disappeared. But I started amassing a list of fellowships and awards that I could apply to right now and in the future as well, when certain conditions have been met that I haven't achieved yet.
Well, the faculty in my department were very helpful and always just sending out calls for any sort of proposal or fellowship. I had actually gotten advice back in my undergrad about using funding databases and using other universities' funding databases, not limit yourself to, you know, FSU or the University of Missouri or wherever. Just go look on like a, you know, usually a pretty big name, maybe a state university or a big research university, and look at their fellowships office and their funding databases all around and start making a database of potential fellowships that fit various keywords related to your research. So for mine, I was looking at music, I was looking at Latin American studies, women's studies, anything related to gender or feminism, cultural anthropology. It was like a whole list of things that could, you know, any sort of thing could be related to my research. I put it down and then, you know, narrowed my spreadsheet down from that. But it was pretty helpful to see like, oh yeah, some of the same, you know, awards and fellowships appear, but there was always some surprises depending on what university you're looking at too, that you could find some stuff that you never would have known of.
I'm
So
gonna,
I was gonna just mention what I put in the chat. There's a pivot, which is like through FSU. I'm sure it's just a company, but there's like the FSU space. And it's just a list of like funding opportunities. It goes anywhere from like, $500 for maybe like conference travel up to I don't know, maybe like $1 million for whatever type of big project you want to work on. But searching through there, I haven't really used it a lot, but I do know people that have used it. And it's a pretty comprehensive list of like funding associated with your topic. So that's a decent resource to look at too.
so our website will help you also get to a bunch of ways. So I'm sorry, I'm going to hijack the conversation for a second here to say ogfa.fsu.edu is our website. And a couple things here that are useful. So one is you don't just have to look at your faculty members' CVs. You can also look by departments to see what other people in your department have previously won. If they've reported it to us, if we're aware of it, we put it here. So you can, Daniel's in biology. So let's look at biology, and you can see what other students in biology have previously applied for and won, which cues you in then to things that might be relevant to you because you know that they fund your area, right? So you may also want to apply for the Lerner Gray Fund or the Guy Harvey Fellowship or the Lewis and Clark Fund for exploration. These are all pretty common ones for biology and especially for funding field work. And so now you're aware of them. But you also might be able to connect with some of your peers who have applied for these things previously and won them, and they can maybe provide some peer support if you're going to apply for the same thing. So perhaps Daniel's already done this, but Daniel could have asked, Laurel about applying for the Lerner Gray Fund. And perhaps she'd be willing to look over his material or share her own materials with him. We also have a link here to funding databases. So here's Pivot, which is it's a subscription based. So as long as you have an FSU email account, you'll be able to log into Pivot. But we also then link to a bunch of the ones that Abby just mentioned at other universities. This fellowship finder at the University of Illinois is a really good one. They maintain it well. UCLA and Rutgers and Duke are also three that are pretty good. We do not maintain our own database at FSU, but we have underneath this tab that says funding alerts. First, you'll just find a few upcoming ones that may have something of interest to you. It may not. There's not always going to be something there that resonates with your needs or your field. But if you keep scrolling down on that same page, you'll get to a series of PDF funding booklets we've put together. We try to maintain these every fall. We go through and try to update the links and the deadlines. But basically, you open one and it's a PDF booklet that is going to go through and have hyperlinks that take you straight to the award pages for the various awards that are in here. So these booklets are not at all exhaustive, but they're an easy place to start. And because Pivot can be fairly complicated to use, because Pivot has a bunch of funding on there that is not for graduate students, it is for faculty, it's for government researchers, it's for nonprofit foundations who apply as a foundation for a grant. We do have like a 35-minute Pivot tutorial that you can find underneath this workshop's video resources tab right here. And then navigating Pivot workshop, it's like 35-minute tutorial. You can watch that while you basically set up a few searches for yourself in Pivot. The thing that makes Pivot really powerful and a really good way to find funding is that you can save your searches in Pivot. So once you log into Pivot, you have your own profile. If you're early in your grad career, you can go ahead and set up like 6 or 7 different types of searches in Pivot, and then you'll get emailed when new things that fit with that search get added. So it's worth taking the time to set up Pivot. The other ones through other universities won't allow you to do that because you can't log into them. But they're also good and easy to use, and in fact, typically easier to use than Pivot. They may not be as complete, but what you trade in completion or completeness, you gain in ease of use. And but those are the resources we provide to help you find funding. But absolutely, I would say also, to echo what was said here, ask your faculty what they applied for. Join your professional societies, your academic societies, whatever represents your field and subfields. Join them as a grad student because it's typically cheaper to do that than it will be once you're no longer a grad student. you might be then eligible to apply for their own funding through that organization. But they also might put you on a listserv that will send out calls for proposals for things that fit broadly with people in that field. Do we have other questions from anybody want to ask a question at this point, or I'll move on with a sort of wrapping up question if not. Okay. Well, I'll ask one question, and then if we have time, I'll ask a second one. The first question is, what do you wish you had known before applying? Or to put it another way, what things did you learn that were kind of painful to learn or difficult to learn about applying for awards that you can perhaps save other people from having to learn through experience? Also think of it maybe as, what unexpected twists and turns or problems did you run into in applying for things?
I've always been very good about planning and making deadlines ahead of time, especially when I need items from other people, like comments or letters of recommendation. So that all went pretty well for all of the fellowships, but I think it was the optional letter of support from Fulbright, from the organization that I was going to work with in Brazil. That was pretty terrifying to get in a 2-week span, sending an email to the director, after doing the on-campus interview, and the committee kind of being like, oh, you should see if you can get a letter of support from them that'll make bolster your application. And I just felt horrible to me. I was like, I'm asking someone to write a letter of recommendation for me who doesn't really know me, and there's not a lot of time. And I was sweating buckets, and then she responded in 100 WhatsApp messages in Portuguese, just there's not enough time, and I'm dealing with a lot of medical issues, and it was just very stressful. And I know there wasn't, even seeing it as an option on the application. I was really wishing I had just went ahead and asked for that letter way ahead of time. But I think just being as nice as possible for the letter of recommenders to get that ample time is always incredibly important, because they have lots of stuff going on in their lives too, and sending reminders to them that, hey, this application is due tonight. Can you please get your letter of recommendation in? Even a simple text or email is always really helpful too. So those unexpected things will pop up. So I think handling them with as much grace as possible is needed too. It's a journey.
I would like to say maybe take some time in exploring the platform through which you'll have to submit the application. In many cases, I don't want to say 100%, but I think the majority of them, you'll be able to go back and edit. Yeah, you don't have to do all of the application at the same, or in one single go, let's say. And you can start filling in little bits and pieces, and as a little bonus that feels like making progress, which it is. But also through exploring the platform, you can see how it's supposed to work. So for example, in some platform, some cases, the rec letter has to be emailed to a specific email, but in many others, GRFP included, for example, it's through the platform that the GRFP sends a link for the recommenders to then send a letter. And I had trouble with that. I did something wrong while I was filling out that, and my recommenders didn't get a link. The platform closed, and I don't even remember how I was able to manage to get the link, but NSF told me there's nothing else to do. Eventually, it worked out, but I was this close to not being able to even compete in the year that I actually got it, because I didn't fully understand the platform, and I left it until way later than I should have to send all of those things out. And in some cases, the platforms are confusing or just awkward to maneuver. So just taking some time to go through the platform, see how exactly is it that they're going to request the materials, the documents, the information, and then slowly making progress in the days before the deadline, and not right before it's about to close. It's probably the best way to ensure that everything runs smoothly and everything is in order for you to be able to apply.
We've also seen people run into unexpected short answer essay questions built into the application form. So you might think to yourself, oh, I know all the application components. I'm working through the written materials. I know I just need to fill out, I just need to fill in all the identifying information on the form. So I'll leave that to the last minute. And then if it turns out you've got 1,000-character answer to, a short answer for a critical question that they're obviously going to be reading closely, and you'll wish that you had also been spending weeks drafting that. So absolutely do what Daniel suggests and just sign on, create your login, and just click through all the parts of the application well ahead of time to avoid any last minute panic.
Yeah, something that I don't know if it's like struggle with, but something, no, that's fair. Something I've like struggled with the application is the audience that I'm writing to. Even though like it's all my like research or like my dissertation research, the audience for the specific like place that I'm writing it to is different. And in the education field can be a lot of times politicized. So, I like my grant is through a group that tends to have like a certain kind of political belief generally associated with it. But like I have another thing that like there's no funding attached to it, but it's just like a little fellowship that I just got like recently. And that's like the complete opposite side of the political spectrum. And so, I submitted the same research to both of those, but the audience is really different. And in order to, again, like education is politicized at times, just being able to write to a drastically different audience about the same thing took me a little bit to kind of do well and make sure that like I'm writing it appropriately.
Yeah, those are each great responses. I think, again, a consistent theme emerges here, which is just give yourself plenty of time, because all of these things require you to have had plenty of time and to, avoid panic wherever you can. To understand who the audience is, again, you've got to get to know the award you're applying for and do your research on it, figure out who that funder is, what the mission and values of the funding organization, but also the particular funding mechanism are, so that you can write to that one. There might be that you, particularly if you're doing a dissertation, you're covering a lot of ground. There might be certain elements you want to forefront to one funder, but not to another. There might be, parts you want to emphasize, parts you want to downplay. So yeah, you're presenting the same overall research, but the way that you do that might be fairly different. Or in one, it might be what's important to this funder is an element of your methodology, and for another funder, it might be, they may not care about the methodology, but they may care about the, if you're seeking different ways of publishing, if you're also doing like a digital collection or a website or something like that, and you're looking at new forms of engagement and outreach. So all funders care about different things, and certainly, giving yourself plenty of time to understand what it is you're applying for will help you know what to do in the application. But also avoiding last minute panic over letters of rec. I mean, one thing we always recommend is to not pass your own panic along to your recommenders. So the best way to do that is to alert them early on, make sure that they have all the information they need, and then to provide very polite and gentle reminders as you're getting closer to the deadline. And you might even give them a fake deadline a little bit ahead of the actual deadline. They're unlikely to look it up themselves. And so, tell them that it's the week before, and then you just don't have to wait until, the last minute to see if your recommendation came in or not. Question about whether you would use AI for feedback. I was going to wrap things up here, but that's a great question. I do wonder whether any of you have used AI in your pursuit of funding applications, or if you would consider doing that.
I might give a fairly opinionated answer here. As a former teacher, I wouldn't. A lot of like the AI models are like really good at giving you like basic information. And to be fair, like I've used it to help me think through something, but I've never used it to actually produce writing or to like answer a question. I would be really cautious using it because you don't know exactly really what's going into it. I mean, teach their own, but again, just from a former teacher having graded assignments and stuff, I don't know, it's probably like an easy way to make a mistake that you don't catch. It's my opinionated thought. Like I wouldn't use it.
I agree with Alex. I've used AI as a tool for other things. So for example, solving like coding things that may eventually make it into a proposal, like to be able to get a graph or like make something pretty in that sense. Or like even in some case, like the grant that I just submitted, I used AI to try to find references more quickly. But like even like all of that is taken with a grain of salt. So like an AI software told me this is the title, and I went, checked the reference, actually read the paper. It just made the process of searching for the papers that I needed quicker. But I also don't like, I'm also on the same page as Alex as in terms of not using AI to generate the content of the text. I'm not that versed in AI, so like, but like, and like for that matter, I don't know if grant application platforms may have incorporated some of these software that can catch how, like the Turnitin software that we have in Canvas. But I'm also I would also be very cautious, and like I myself wouldn't do it, of asking AI to generate a paragraph or generate ideas. I don't even use it to review my grammar, and English is not my first language. And even in that case, I feel skeptical about asking AI to make a paragraph like grammatically better, because I don't know if that's going to be like just something standard that then could potentially be replicated by someone else by accident, by someone asking something similar. And because I also feel that I have my own writing style, and I try to keep my writing style in that way.
Yeah, just seeing some of the other questions in the chat. I don't use AI either, but I think utilizing the resources on campus beyond your faculty or friends, like the Writing Center, could be helpful in these cases of, just getting comments on your writing style and your clarity of writing, especially when you feel like maybe those close to you might have some limited time. You might be able to find a tutor here on campus whose job it is to read your writing and provide that kind of feedback. So I would utilize that resource.
I mean, the AI question is complicated. I'm considering trying to eventually put together like an actual workshop on, more even like a discussion type workshop on AI for fellowship applications. It's obviously a big discussion in among fellowship advisors and among funding organizations right now. Some are specifically forbidding it. Some are asking, like the American Heart Association's pre-doctoral fellowship just has a checkbox in the application that just asks applicants to indicate whether they have used AI as part of the preparation. It will not affect the way they're just doing it for statistical purposes right now. It will not affect the review process. They just want to know. I would definitely echo everybody saying don't use it for idea generation. For reviewing your own writing, I've played around with it both with Copilot, which is Microsoft's AI, and ChatGPT. I've actually done things like fed them a student's application that was successful and asked, based on the review criteria, can you basically review and score this, score this proposal for me? And it came back like saying that there was still significant gaps that needed to be filled in. Again, it was a funded proposal. The student got it. So it was, steering the student, the hypothetical person toward additional revisions on something that did not need additional revisions. I've also, though, seen that like AI does sometimes generate a better first draft than other people do on their own. And so like using it as sort of like an idea partner has worked for some people and been, it has helped them more sort of think about gaps where they needed to provide more detail. I mean, AI's own, like if it spits something back out to you, if you ask it to help you generate content, its content is going to be very generic and it's not going to win you any funding. Absolutely, your own voice, your own experiences, your own details need to come through in any fellowship application, and an AI just can't generate those things for you. It might help you come up with a sort of structure, like using it in the planning stage could be potentially useful to think through, what should I include in this essay based on this prompt? Maybe it will help you parse a prompt. I can also help you do that though. Another thing to keep in mind with ChatGPT is, and this works this way for many of the AI things that are not ones that you would actually pay to subscribe to, they are still using your content to learn. So if you feed in your funding proposal, well, now you no longer necessarily own all of your own words, right? They're now out there as part of that language model that the AI is based on. So just, potentially there's some privacy concerns there. About your own ideas in your own proposals. So like Inga, I mean, yeah, it might provide you some criticism on your own writing, but in the process, it might also be filing away your specific research, so that the next person who comes along and asks a question about I can only kind of remember what your research does, Inga. I know it deals with taste and but basically, if somebody gave it a right prompt, it could spit something back to you that has a little bit to do with your research that it now knows about. Thank you very much, Abby. So I'd say, basically, yeah, take it with a grain of salt. Try to get people to read your stuff instead of AI, but also just if you're going to engage with AI, understand its limitations, its potential pitfalls. AI also hallucinates and provides wrong answers to things, so it will spit back to you. Daniel, you said you've gone and checked if the citation actually exists. It will sometimes spit back things that don't actually exist as answers, as sources. And you can see it, people post those funny examples sometimes that are like, asking ChatGPT how many letters there are in a word, and it comes back and counts the letters wrong. And the person will say, no, there's 7 letters, and it will say, no, there are 6 letters, I've counted them. And like you can look at it and tell that the AI is wrong and it hasn't counted the letters correctly. So if it can make a mistake like that, it can make much bigger mistakes as well. If there's another question or two, we can maybe linger for another minute or two, but otherwise we'll wrap things up here.